Welcome back everyone. As most of you know, the iPad 9th generation just came out, so let's go and compare it against the older last generation, the iPad 8th generation that came out in 2020. Now both these iPads are great. I love these, units that Apple pushed out. They are amazing iPads for the value. And to be honest, the iPad 9th generation, that 2021 model, is a pretty good upgrade coming from that iPad 8th generation. At first, I wasn't completely too sure because, they kind of had the same thing going on and I didn't really see too big of a difference, but it is actually quite a bit of a difference when it comes down to it. Now, if you want to pick up either one of these specific iPads, I will leave both of these linked down in the description below so you can get them from there and you can also help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the price tag, they're actually the same price tag as last year. So you can still buy an iPad, 8th generation for cheaper in the used market properly. And there's probably some, Best Buy deals here and there to get rid of these things. But the 9th generation still starts at $329, but you also have twice the amount of base storage for that model. So with the iPad 8th generation, that base model was 32 gigabytes. Now that iPad 9th generation starts at 64 gigabytes. So that's a massive difference between the two, and I'm really glad they did that. And the top tier storage also went up twice the model, so 128 now to 256, so that's another really cool improvement. So when it comes down to those little integral things, those are really awesome things to have going from one iPad to the other. Now on the front, the displays are pretty much almost the exact same thing. You have 10.2 inch IPS panels on both, pretty much the same brightness, pretty much the same resolution, same home button, same everything like that. But there is no longer a white model of that iPad, 9th generation. They all have black fronts, which look really nice, and I actually prefer that. But a big thing to keep in mind, and this is something that Apple highlighted, quite a bit, is that iPad in 9th generation now has True Tone technology on that display. And I like this a lot. It really does add a little bit more character to the whole entire panel. And all it does, it pretty much is, it adds some warmth to the panel. I used to have some, devices back in the day that didn't have True Tone. And even the iPad 8th generation, when you compare the two, you may actually prefer the iPad 9th generation panel. It is a pretty big difference. And when you have True Tone to when you don't have it, it is quite a bit of difference, to be completely honest. So I'm really glad they did that. And that is a huge, massive display difference between the two. Now you have lightning ports on the bottom. The back is pretty much the same exact build quality. I'm pretty sure everyone knows this by now. It feels extremely good in the hand. It does not feel cheap whatsoever. But those cameras actually did get a little bit different. So previously on the iPad 8th generation, you actually had an 8 megapixel sensor. Now you could only do 1080p at 30 frames per second on that video. Whereas on the iPad 9th generation, you pretty much still have that same exact back camera. So the back cameras are pretty much the same, 1080p at 30, nothing really crazy here as far as we know, but the bigger difference, and this is something that really shocks me, is the front camera. So with that iPad 8th generation, it had a 1.2 megapixel sensor, it's 720p at 30, it really wasn't that great, but you're probably not doing too many videos on your iPad, but so I thought. Apparently, there must have been a lot of people who use their front-facing camera on their iPad because Apple has now pushed out a much better front-facing camera on the iPad 9th generation. This is an ultra-wide sensor on the front, so the back camera surprisingly isn't even as good as that front camera of this iPad. So it's a 12 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, and you can go up to 1080p at 60 frames per second on this front camera. So in my opinion, if you're planning on shooting videos, if you're planning on, doing things like FaceTime calls with this, not only does it have that ultra-wide sensor and a higher megapixel count, higher quality lens, but you also have center stage mode, which basically, for FaceTime calls and stuff, it will go ahead and track your facial movement and all this stuff wherever you're going. So that is another massive capability that you have on the iPad 9th generation. By far, this is one of the biggest improvements that we've seen on the iPad lineup for the base model iPads in terms of camera. Now, of course, we still are stuck with that 8 megapixel back-facing camera, but I'm really happy to see that for these base model iPads, we now have 1080p at 60 at some form. Before we didn't have it, now we have it at least on the front. I think next year we'll probably see some better cameras on the back, but we'll see how that goes. But in terms of the camera setup, the iPad 9th generation definitely wins here. Now in terms of longevity, the iPad 9th generation is also going to outlast the iPad 8th generation at least by a year, maybe not. it does have a newer chipset than the iPad 8th generation, so keep that in mind. When you're getting that newer iPad, you're getting an iPad with a newer chipset, and basically how you're going to look at these is the iPad 8th generation has the same chipset as the iPhone XR and XS from 2018. The iPad 9th generation has the same chipset as the iPhone 11 that came out in 2019. So a little bit of a difference there. It's definitely nothing super crazy, but you do have to kind of keep that in mind that the 9th generation iPad is probably going to outlast that 8th generation iPad. Now, on top of that, another pretty big thing is the performance difference. Now, so I thought, I really don't think there's a crazy big difference in terms of performance between these two, but the iPad 8th generation does have that Apple A12 Bionic chip inside of it with 3 gigabytes of RAM, with the iPad 9th generation has that Apple A13 Bionic chip inside of it with 3 gigabytes of RAM. So again, not an insanely big amount of difference. You're getting the same amount of RAM on both of them, but to be honest, you are getting a little bit of a performance increase. With that iPad 9th generation, I had a very good time with it. Very rarely did I think it couldn't handle what I threw at it. It was a very good performing iPad, but I do think the 8th generation iPad from last year is still fairly fast. I had a very few differences between the two, and with my iPad 8th generation, of course, if you try to take it up a notch and you try to do some extreme stuff, especially when it comes down to the multitasking portion, you may start to see a couple of differences, maybe some chop frames here and there, but for the most part, in terms of RAM management, these two things are going to be at the exact same level. But that iPad 9th generation does take it up a notch. It does actually have a better chipset, so you're going to be getting better performance. And with the chipset like that, you're going to be getting more optimized enhancements. You're going to be getting probably faster, gameplay and all this stuff. But for a majority of people out there, from what I've seen with their iPads, they typically do a lot of schoolwork. These things are situated more so for students. And if you're doing a lot of document writing and things like that, both these iPads are going to be perfect. And especially if you're going to do light gaming, light video editing, things like that, both these iPads are going to be great. But that iPad 9th generation is going to be the faster, better performing one at the end of the day. So that covers that up in the performance segment. I also kind of wanted to hit on the battery size and the battery life. I've been getting very good battery life on this iPad 9th generation, very good standby time. And with the iPad 8th generation, it is kind of said that they both had the same exact battery within them. So Apple didn't really change the battery size within them. They're both going to be great, and I've had pretty good battery life on both of these iPads. So that pretty much covers up the whole entire video. Now, to answer the question, should you go and buy an iPad 9th generation? Should you upgrade your iPad 8th generation to the 9th? All that good stuff. And this is pretty much what I will tell you. If you have an iPad 8th generation, I probably would not go to that 9th generation iPad. I don't think it's really worth the money from the iPad 8th generation. I think there are some really cool enhancements, but for the most part, if you currently have an iPad 8, there's really not a big reason to go and jump to the iPad 9 unless you really care about that front camera. Other than that, you're pretty much almost getting the same exact thing. Now, with that 9th generation iPad, if you're coming from something like an iPad 6 or 7, or if you don't currently have an iPad, then I would just say go for the iPad 9. It is a pretty worthwhile upgrade, and because they're both fairly cheap, you're getting a pretty good valued iPad even when it's brand new. You're getting a pretty good display with True Tone, which is awesome. You're getting the same battery size, which is kind of weird, but you are getting better performance, and I think you're getting a better front-facing camera by far. So I'll definitely tell you, if you have the money, definitely go for the iPad 9. If you're strictly on a budget, then the iPad 8th generation is still a very good iPad as well. It's definitely not old, and if you have an iPad 8, I would not go for the iPad 9 in my opinion. So that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.